Good evening and welcome to Planet Action today, Friday, the 18th day of November 2022. The COP27 conference in Egypt comes to an end with world leaders, opinion shapers, civil society and other stakeholders having presented their position with regards to climate change and what must be done if we are to save this world, the only place we call home. My name is Dennis Aseto, and later I will be having a discussion on the hits and misses and the lessons we can learn from the just concluded exercise. But now let's talk about stories that made news during this entire process. Now in Kenya, billionaire philanthropist Bill Gates, who visited the country this week, pledged continued support in Kenya in various areas such as healthcare and agriculture. Gates said that with regards to climate change that continues to ravage the world, rich nations should give support to poorer countries, adding that the youth must get together and find solutions to the existing challenges.
I think we have to be realistic that there's not going to be a check that funds every bad weather event, but we need to have, in terms of justice, increased generosity. It does come at a tough time because the European budgets are deeply affected by the Ukraine war. These democracies decide that they're willing to prioritize that. In the meantime, we have to use all of human ingenuity to figure out, whether it's a drought, what seeds can deal with that, if it's a flood, how to direct those waters to cause the least damage. This is all called climate mitigation, adaptation, and I co-chaired a panel that the foundation funded on adaptation that was started 3 years ago, because climate mitigation gets a lot more visibility than climate adaptation. Climate mitigation is very important because how well we do there will determine how much adaptation we need. In the area of climate mitigation, which a group that I fund called Breakthrough Energy, has invested in over 100 companies that are working to get rid of emissions. And the goal in Breakthrough Energy is to be able to perform the same process with no extra cost, and so achieve what I call a zero green premium, because we don't want to make cement or steel or meat or driving a car. We don't want to make it more expensive.
And African leaders termed the climate change summit a failure, saying the demands by poor and developing countries for climate financing to help them deal and cope with the effects of climate change seemed to have fallen on deaf ears. According to Article 9 of the Paris Agreement, developed countries should provide financial resources to help developing parties with respect to mitigation and adaptation. Suleiman Yeri spoke to a section of them, and here are some of their reactions.
Young people, once again, have been disadvantaged. Moving ahead to COP28, our future looks uncertain, and we are not sure of what our next step would look like. And we want to call on leaders, knowing that COP27 is already a disappointment for young people, including women and girls. We would encourage the African group of negotiators to continue to look at our various recommendations from young people, policy statements, to ensure that young people are included in especially locally led adaptation project that we have been calling for and been pushing for. For now, young people are not proud of the outcome so far at the negotiation room.
We cannot continue having different COPs coming up with programs, coming up with work plans, but without concrete finance on the ground. Everyone is deciding or choosing to go for voluntary contributions. No, we needed committed finance. We needed committed finance to ensure that whatever we are agreeing on here can be implemented on the ground back home.
We leave less reassured of the goodwill of global leaders especially those in high polluting industrialized countries, to make the bold decisions needed to respond to the scale and urgency of the climate crisis.
But we have no answer to our communities suffering in northern Kenya, to those communities that lost livestock, to those communities that are dying, to that particular woman, to the children of that particular woman who died looking for water for the children, leaving behind 7 children. What are we going to go and tell that kid or those particular children? We won't go empty-handed, and I think the future is very, very, very...
Some of the sentiments shared back in Egypt. Now, today, the curtains have fallen at Sharm el-Sheikh for the COP27 conference in Egypt. Lengthy discussions have been held. Negotiators and environment champions have argued their case on why we should act now if we are to change the tide with regards to climate change. But after 2 weeks of discussions, what was the outcome? What are the wins we can take home? And what are the misses we can learn from the exercise? To have this discussion is Dr. Kinyanjui Koimbori, climate change expert and founder, Climate Change Kenya organization. Welcome to this show, sir. You are in Egypt, and some of the issues, as rightfully raised by African leaders, is fact that the issues affecting African nations with regards to loss and damage has been pushed to 2024. What is your response to that?
Yes, thank you so much for having me on this pertinent discussion. Just to give a sum up of what was, of which I was part of the COP27 in Egypt, and what actually we saw within those 2 weeks, that is starting from 6th up to the 18th. So look at these discussions, the way they were geared. In fact, COP27 is being termed as an implementation phase, because we are implementing all those things that have been discussed way back from COP, the first COP. But when you look at COP27, the way you looked at it, we had one segment being added in the agendas, which has not been there for a long time. We had adaptation, mitigation, and finance. And then we had another segment known as loss and damage. So loss and damage is not a new segment. The only difference is that it has been removed from the side talks into the main agenda. The first time such kind of talks were discussed were way back in COP13, that is in 2007, during the Bali climate change. It was being termed as compensation, but now we have given it a different name, that is loss and damage. And what this pertains to, what it entails, is how are we going to be compensated as developing nations by the developing nations, because we have put mitigation measures, adaptation measures. They are no longer working. They have now suffered the catastrophes of droughts, floods, heat waves. Now we want that money to be given to us so that we can be able to drive our climate resilience and climate proof our infrastructures, so that we can avert the damages and the losses we have been seeing in terms of social, economic, and all these losses we are seeing year in, year out.
Now, Daktari, as we talk about the funding that is needed to be given mostly by the developed nations, we go back to the Kyoto Protocol, then come to the Paris Agreement, the COP26 in Glasgow. We've always talked about funding that never seems to be getting here. At COP27, these was addressed, and it seems like it's going to be a problem. What is the way forward for us, and what will make sense to African countries and developing nations?
Thank you so much. Something that the viewers also have to understand is that all these COP trees that all these nations are engaging in, they are not binding. That means that if a country does not commit to the pledges they have put forth in terms of financial, they cannot be held accountable, they cannot be taken to court. So these pledges, they are not binding. So that becomes one challenge. So this all trickles down to political goodwill. How best, or how motivated are the countries towards actually moving towards a green economy. But I'm happy to say that this year these countries have pledged, especially in the loss and damage sector. We have seen one of the countries, Denmark, being the first country, having pledged around $13 million as early as September, going into the kitty of loss and damage. We have seen other countries now pulling up. This has happened as late as yesterday, where other countries have pledged into the loss and damage with a tune of a few dollars. That is, we are talking about Belgium, Austria, we're talking about New Zealand, Germany, Canada, and Ireland, giving their pledges into putting money into the loss and damage kitty. So what I'm saying in a nutshell is that it's all trickled down to the will and the motivation that people have into saving humanity.
Now, we talk about water house being pledged. As we wait for that to happen back home, what are some of the initiatives that we can put into place, that we can take as Kenya, as Africans, so that we can start dealing with the problems that we are facing in the event that the funding from the West doesn't come in? We have a fallback plan.
So in regard to what we're witnessing, especially in Africa, out of the 54 countries that we have in Africa, 90% of them have witnessed climate change catastrophes in one way or the other. With just recently Kenya having experienced a loss of around 2 million loss in cattle and catastrophes amounting to 1.5 billion. So what I'm saying is that what we need to do is that we need to see how best we can pitch what we call climate projects into accessing the Green Climate Fund. And one of the things that was discussed at the table was how can we make cheaper or less cost effective in accessing the Green Climate Fund. And in Kenya, back here, we have seen some of the efforts that people are engaging in, especially the nature-based solutions, because in fighting climate change, there are two solutions. Either you apply nature-based solutions or scientifically based solutions. So nature-based solutions are usually cheap and at our disposal. And here I'm talking about the planting of trees. The trees have been known to be carbon sinks. So when you plant trees, they actually help to absorb this carbon that is in the atmosphere that contributes into global warming. In fact, a single tree can contribute enough oxygen for 2 grown-ups or 2 human beings in a single day. So that's enough for actually sequestering or absorbing the carbon in the atmosphere. The other solutions I've seen is farmers being advised to move away from keeping the ruminant animals, that is the cattle, which are known to produce a lot of methane. Also, we have seen other measures such as green building solutions, people being advised to do what we call recycling, moving away from fossil fuel, that is moving into e-mobility. And I've seen Kenya is actually moving that way. I've seen electric motorcycles on our roads, and also the BRT system, which I'm hoping the Minister of Transport and also will be able to spearhead this movement so that we can move towards reducing traffic. So I can mention, but maybe have enough time, I'll be able to mention which are some of the scientific methods we can use, which are which are active and working. And are using one of a carbon sequester machine, which is able to absorb carbon from the atmosphere. They are using a machine which is able to produce hydrogen from water. Also seen the Arab Emirates using a machine known as to do cloud, a machine whereby you put an aeroplane, it injects electric currents and in arid area. So many ingenious ways, but we are looking for those that are cost effective and they are cheap for developing nations to adopt.
And yes, Dr. you've raised something very pertinent with regards to planting trees. President William Ruto is big on tree planting. In his speeches, he's talked about planting 5 billion trees by the year 2032. Just how feasible is this? And in other bodies who are supporting the fight against climate change, how should they come together to see this achieved?
Yes, I think this is a very positive effort, and I want to commend the President, that is His Excellency William Samoei Ruto, who is also the chair of the African countries and nations on matters climate change. So planting of trees is one way, and it can help, it can go a long way in terms of actually reducing our carbon that is in the atmosphere. And remember that we have even entered, there was a discussion that was being put forth in COP27 on carbon markets and carbon credits. So planting of trees will eventually pay off in Kenya. And remember, we are standing at around 12% forest cover. So a good example is Gabon. Gabon planted trees and it increased its forest cover up to 89%. In fact, last year they were paid $17 million as part of carbon credits. So as much as we are planting these trees, we are going to reap the benefits of carbon credits once we start selling the carbon credits out of the trees we have planted. So Kenya should be aiming at reaching up to 80% of forest cover as opposed to where we are at 11%. And I see this possible by the year 2030. And Kenya will start seeing the returns of planting these trees. And I'm seeing this as a job opportunity for all those people who are engaged in tree planting and seedlings, whereby they can now try to see how best they can engage the county governments and the national government so that they can sell the tree seedlings to them and earn money out of that.
Now, Dr. one of the most important aspects when it comes to addressing climate change is the use of energy. We know that countries are cutting the use of coal, and actually the globe over, countries are encouraged to stay away from that. But then comes the question of green energy, that resources have to be put in. In Kenya, for example, we have the ability to have wind energy, talk about solar energy, but now the issue comes the cost. At COP27, was this discussed, the countries that produce these resources in bulk, in terms of cost? Are we likely going to see subsidized rates to African countries and other developing nations?
Yes, I think beginning of the COP27, one of the positive things we saw in terms of the move towards green renewable energy was one of the agreements that we saw between Egypt and Norway, where they have agreed to set up a 100 megawatt hydrogen plant within the Red Sea. And this is a positive effort. And this is possible that if African nations can move towards the hydrogen phase, it can be able to actually spearhead our next revolution towards a green economy. So getting you back to how can Africa move to that phase? It is possible, and I've seen the EU pledging to about 300, almost 600, 1 billion, sorry, almost $1 billion into seeing how best if South Africa can be able to move away from the use of coal. Remember, in Africa, South Africa is leading in the use of coal, followed by other countries such as Malawi, Mozambique, and also Zimbabwe. Globally, we are having USA and Russia leading. So we have seen a lot of investment coming into Africa so that African nations can move away from the dependency of coal and shift to green renewable energy. I'm seeing a window that we can be able to, that is the use of solar, wind, the use of what do you call it, even biogas, and Kenya is actually leading in Africa. In fact, Kenya, in terms of geothermal and green energy, we are leading in Africa, and globally, Kenya is ranked top 10 in terms of the use of green energy. So it is possible, and putting in mind that only Africa contributes less than 3% into the greenhouse gases. But the question begs, why does Africa suffer the most when it comes to climate change effects? The reason being that the causes of climate change are usually local, but the effects of climate change are usually global. And remember that Africa, almost 90% of the agriculture in Africa depends on rain-fed agriculture. So there was also a discussion on how Africa can move from rain-fed agriculture, smart agriculture, and I'm seeing the visit today by Bill Gates into him investing 700 billion Kenya shillings into the African continent, or $7 billion into the African continent. We'll be touching on the sectors of agriculture. Remember, he's pushing so much into the GMOs, and I know so many scientists are skeptical on this, but we need to see how best we can embrace be it GMOs and the hybrids that we have, because the future, as we see it moving forward, will only be able to actually be able to help crops that can adapt to this changing climate to survive and to feed the growing population that has been estimated to reach 8 billion as we talk right now.
Yes, Dr. and I agree with you that we have a lot more to be done. That fortunately time is not on our side. This conversation definitely must continue, and yes indeed we do call upon every individual on the face of this earth that we continue being green, that you take care of our environment, because this is the only place we call home. My name is Dennis Aseto. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And Brenda Radido will be coming in with the news. Good evening.